Okay, so today what we're going to do is we're going to try to get caught up on one, just kind of an introduction again, and research methodology, kind of just an introduction to the how research is done and what its purposes are, and just kind of an overall view. The topic for this week, according to the syllabus, was determining the research topic. But in a lot of ways, that's not a lengthy discussion, so I didn't make a set of slides for that. But then next week we will have a set of slides specifically for defining the research problem. So what we can do is I can just go ahead and I'll share the screen on these slides that you have available to you on the class materials, folder for this course. So, but I'll just go ahead and kind of run through them here. And then, as we've talked about last week, that'll be the first hour. We'll discuss through some of this in the first hour. And then I do also want to pull up a question for discussion towards the end of this slides as well. And then in the second hour, we will talk about an ethical question that is a question related to ethics that I would like for us to be able to discuss as a group and just kind of get your understanding on and kind of have a nice discussion. And then that will be the end of our time today. Okay, so basically, if we think about research, what is research? So the word in English, right, to put the re on the front of something oftentimes means to do it again. So oftentimes research is related to doing a search again for something. So basically a lot of research, a lot of what we're going to talk about, a lot of what you're going to do, you're going to spend a lot of time searching for things related to your topic that other people have already done. So there's a part of it, so there's a big part of it that we'll talk about, because it's not listed as a topic per se, but we do talk about it here in this set of slides, is what's called a literature review, where the purpose of a literature review is kind of see what's already out there, see what has already been done by other researchers in our field, or sometimes in not necessarily directly related to our field, but just kind of see what's out there to be able to have an understanding of understand the topic better. There's a lot of reasons for why we'll do a literature review. Some of it is to gain better understanding, of the topic, to gain better understanding of the problem. A lot of it could also be another purpose of doing a literature review would be to see potential directions that maybe have not been taken before in solving a particular problem. To see what directions have been taken and to therefore see if the direction we're considering might not have been taken before. What else? For those of you who have done a literature review before, I know that's a few of you in this group. What am I missing? What are some other purposes of doing a literature review?
One thing is to see if your idea has already been done before.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, because what Seth is talking about there is sometimes we may be thinking that we have some novel new approach to something. We start doing a literature search for what's out there, and we find out that someone has already done what we are planning on doing, which can be good, can be bad. It usually is not what we want to see, is a direct example of what we've already done. But I can tell you from my own experience, some of my research topic that I did for my dissertation was related to what's called reproducibility in research. And what we were trying to do was to assist in being able to have existing computer simulation based experiments and be able to reproduce them so that we could have more confidence in the results of the initial study. And at the time that I was doing my dissertation, at the time that I was writing my dissertation, there was a fairly substantial lack of reproducibility. It was a pretty big lack in people that would redo experiments that had already been done to verify that the results were accurate. There's all kinds of potential reasons for that, and that's actually kind of maybe part of our, not today's ethical discussion, but we could actually make that part of a future ethical discussion. Ethics-based discussion would be about the why is there this lack of reproducing? Why don't people check the results of existing studies? And we can talk about that. Maybe I should like write that down, keep a note of all the topics I want to discuss with this class as part of the ethics portion. Okay, anyway, so one of the things that we're going to do as part of our research is a literature review. Is going to be going out there and seeing what's out there. We also might perform our own experiments. Right, that might be a form of research. Would be taking experiments and testing as we change the independent variables, what happens with the dependent variables and stuff like that. We may also do not particularly experiments of a nature of where we change variables, but we might do what's it called? Stuff like questionnaires and stuff where we do kind of testing of participants' experience and stuff like that. Not so much in the area of computing, but the truth is that a lot computing is used in a lot of different fields now, not just particularly computer science and computer engineering, but we do have to use software-based approaches for a lot of different fields nowadays. All right, let's see. Okay. Let's see some other stuff that I specifically wanted to point out. Some different of the objectives of research. For us, what we're wanting to do is we're wanting to learn, right? We're wanting to learn something about a field or about a topic. We're wanting to learn something about the way the world and, in a larger sense, the universe acts, and how we can understand it better. Oftentimes, though not always, oftentimes we're trying to solve some problem. We're trying to figure out a good solution to a problem that exists. And this is not to say that solutions don't already exist, but sometimes we may be trying to figure out a better solution. One of the examples I'll often give, because it's something that's it's emotional, but we also all kind of understand it, is I'll talk about the world has a problem with how do we govern people, right? How do we take our nation of people and be able to govern them in a way that people can be successful and do things that they want to do and enjoy life and stuff like that, right? And if you look across the world, there's lots of different solutions to that problem, right? You have the way that my home country of America, they do it in a certain way. Turkey here does it in a certain way. Other countries do it differently, right? If we look across the world at some of the larger countries, China, India, if we look at some of the older countries like the UK, Great Britain, France, Germany, places like that, they all govern people differently, right? Is there to say that one of them does it right and all the rest are doing it wrong? No, we don't say that. But one of the things that all these countries are constantly trying to do is trying to figure out how can we govern people better? How can we help our people in a better way to help the most people succeed in life? And so you can't really run a single experiment with that, can you? You can't just have like, oh, let's test if we change this variable, what happens. Yeah, it's kind of hard to do that. So anyway, so that's one of the objectives that we may do with research is we may take a look at how to solve an existing problem. And I have no doubt that the leaders of all of our countries are oftentimes looking at other countries to try to see, okay, what are they doing differently that might help us to be able to govern our people better? Or even during the midst of like this past year with the pandemic situation, where how many times I would hear people talk about, look at what other countries are doing to help stop the spread of the virus, or look at what other countries are doing that's helping to make sure that, even if people get ill, even if people contract the virus, that they don't die from it or something like that. And there were all kinds of proposed solutions. And, this country did this and this country did that. And we were all trying to do what? We were trying to figure out how do we help people not suffer during this pandemic, right? And so in a sense, lots of people all around the world were doing research, right? Well, I guess not in a sense, they were doing research. They were looking at what was out there and what was being done. And the purpose of it, the objective they were trying to do is they were trying to help people survive, and not only survive, but thrive in the midst of this pandemic. So, yeah. So oftentimes the objective of a research is to solve a problem, but that's not always the case. Sometimes it's just to understand the world or the universe in a better and a more clear way. And there's a slide on that in here. So there's a couple of the types of research that we'll talk about that are discussed in the text. Descriptive, where we look for fact finding, and we try to understand the facts of the situation. We try to understand what's going on. It's not necessarily an experimental type of research. On the other hand, in an analytical research, they may analyze the this is not the slide about the one side versus the experimental kind, but the descriptive is just kind of try to understand the facts, understand what has happened or what is happening. The analytical is where we actually try to make an understanding of the deeper meaning of what the facts are indicating. One of the things that I'll state about actually both of these types, descriptive and analytical, is we need to apply a form of critical thinking that doesn't necessarily just take every source, every piece of information as being equal. We do understand that some sources are primary and some sources are not primary, or kind of a secondary source, or maybe even more down the line than secondary. And we need to be able to weigh how much we trust the source. Okay, how much we trust what we are seeing is an accurate representation. I was actually just talking to a friend today. I've talked a few times recently about this, about with how much information is available to people right now, with how much, just whether it be scientific, whether it be news, just whatever. There's so much information available to us now that you could spend hours upon hours and search hundreds of articles or sources, and still, if you haven't broadened your search, if you're still seeing things from a particular point of view, you're you're only getting one side of the story. You're only getting one point of view on it. And we do need to be careful not to do that. So it's like the example that Seth gave a moment ago. I mean, the truth is, just because you do a search and you read a dozen articles and you don't see your solution proposed in an article doesn't mean that it hasn't been proposed somewhere. All right. But we do try to broaden our search across multiple types, especially if maybe like you only look in one journal and you look at all the articles in one journal and you say, oh, I looked at all these articles and my solution's not there. Well, that may be, but you may need to go broaden to other journals. You may need to broaden to other sources. Okay. All right. Some different types of research: applied versus fundamental. Okay, applied is going to be trying to find a solution. Fundamental is just kind of like trying to understand the way the universe works. Okay, and in a sense, there is a problem you're trying to tackle, and even in the fundamental, where you're just trying to understand the universe, or you're just trying to understand the way something works. That still is to you a problem, because the problem is I don't understand how this works and I need a solution, and the solution is understand how it works. So in a sense, they both have a problem with a solution, but applied is a little bit more of an immediate type of problem, like a facing world hunger would be a problem we would love to find a solution to, right? Homelessness would be a problem we'd love to find a solution to. How to, if anybody figures out a solution to the problem of how to raise children, if you guys can help me out with that, that would be great. I'm thinking that's probably not going to be developed using a software program, but hey, I'm open to anything right these days, right? So, okay, so those are two different sides of research there, applied versus fundamental. Some terms that you definitely, if you don't know these already, I hope most of you do, but there's a big difference in quantitative and qualitative. So quantitative is going to be the measurement of a quantity or an amount, as its name implies. Basically, this is saying, so 5 seconds, right? The software completes in 5 seconds, or the program takes up 2 gigabytes of space, which would be a large program, but okay, those would be exact measurements. Okay, so qualitative, on the other hand, is concerned with qualities of things. So a qualitative measurement, a qualitative thing would be something good, bad, large, small, those kinds of things, right? So we do need to be careful that we know what type of research we are needing and what type of, and for me, what I think of when I think of quantitative versus qualitative is from my own experience working as a software developer, that oftentimes requirements for software have to be quantitative, right? You cannot have qualitative requirements for a software product, because say for example, a customer comes and says, "Oh, I want your software to be fast." Okay, well, who gets to define what fast is, right? And so I can distinctly remember one project that I worked on, and we gave the product over to the client, the customer, and given our functionality, they rated it as has failed their tests. And we're like, okay, tell us what failed and we'll fix it. And they feel right. That was what they wrote. They wrote it didn't feel right. So okay, what does that mean? You can't fix it. We fix if you say it's the wrong color, right? If you say the color was this gross green color and we don't like that, we would prefer it to be a light blue instead. We can fix that, right? We can make that happen. But it doesn't feel right, I don't like it, that's more of a qualitative thing, and that's a yeah, you can't have software. You can't have software requirements that are qualitative in nature. You can't have really any set of requirements for a piece of technology or anything that is qualitative in nature. So, but anyway, so make sure you understand the difference between quantitative and qualitative. Quantity is saying this is an amount. Qualitative is more of a this is a kind. This is an attribute of it that's you can't really put a number on it. You can't really put a specific amount on it. So, but those are two different types of research, two different types of my wording is losing me. So, all right. So you'll also have some types of research that's conceptual versus empirical. All right, so conceptual is just this idea, the theory or idea that exists out there. Empirical is more of a database where we are, you can verify them either by observation or experiment. We can say, okay, this is something that the data, that these are the numbers and this is what it comes back as. And so therefore our hypothesis is either true or false based upon these data points that we got. Okay, empirical is also a type of an experimental where we run an experiment and be able to get results. All right. Some other types that we won't get into. Okay, but the slides are all available. Are you there? Like I said, on the class material, so if you want to look over them. We already talked about this, quantitative versus qualitative. All right. But let's talk about some of the research methods and methodology of the techniques, right, of how we can go about doing some of the different research that we've talked about here. All right. So we might take a form of library research. Now, back when this text was, well, I guess this text isn't that old. I was about to say back when this text, I'm used to using notes that are usually over a decade old, but you know, back when I was, for most of you, your age, we didn't have access to all the millions of documents and millions of records that are available just through a simple Google search. We had to actually go to a library. Right? And so, so there's a type of research that would be library research, where we would go to a library, we would do a search of books and articles, journal articles, conference papers that would be related to our topic, and we would reanalyze them. Okay, how much does this apply to what I'm trying to do? Nowadays, you can do library research from your home, right, from your bed if you want to. I don't suggest doing research in when you're too comfortable laying in your bed, but you know, whatever. But with access to sites like Google Scholar, the IEEE library, and various other journal and conference libraries out there, really obtaining documents for library research is really much easier now than it's ever been. So this is one form. of research that we can do, where we're trying to gain information, right? We're trying to gain understanding of what's out there. So a lot of times what you can do is you can just pull up a Google Scholar. I'm assuming everyone knows what Google Scholar is, right? So you go to scholar.google.com and just kind of type, just like you would any Google search, you type in some keywords of what it is you're looking for, right? So let's say you're wanting to look for documents related to, I don't know, artificial intelligence, natural language processing, something like that, right? You might type that in and do a search, and it's going to probably come back first with things that have that in their title, okay? It's probably going to come back with stuff that's in the title. Maybe keywords will be included in that as well. And then you just you can kind of sort through, you can kind of scroll through some of the results and see, okay, which ones of these look like what I'd be interested in finding. Well, in fact, let's go ahead and pull it up. All right, so if you pull up Google Scholar, what's something? Let's see. Well, what did I say? Artificial. Natural language processing. All right, so I do a search for this, and wow, one result. Well, okay. I was not expecting that. So what you can do is you can look through this and you kind of see portion of the abstract here. So just take off the natural language processing part and just say artificial intelligence. That should give us a whole more, right? And notice that some of these will give a PDF where you can actually go ahead and download the PDF itself, start reading it. What's another? Let's see. Another one, autonomous vehicles, right? That's another fun one. All right, autonomous vehicles, and then you can say, oh, let's see, I can read through. Person identification using gait. You mean use that as a search term, Derek? This right here. I'm assuming this is what you meant. Right? And you can see what comes back. All right, and if it has this little PDF, you can click on that and it should download it. Right. So here we can go ahead and pull up, get access to the paper directly. Just got a notification saying that my network quality is bad, so it may be that this is taking up a lot of bandwidth. Right. And so then you can take a look at this paper, see if it is related to what you're trying to do. Okay. So what I'm getting at is, compared to when I was younger, I won't say how long ago it was, but compared to when I was younger, doing research of this nature is a lot easier and a lot faster than it used to be. Okay, but this should be, especially when you're trying to talk about a literature review, this should be your first stop. Right, this should be the first. This or the IEEE library or another journal library like that should be the first place you go to try to find documents related to what you're working on. Okay. Let's see. So let's go back to slides here. All right. You can also do field research. Now, this will be if we're trying to understand something about the way that people, the way that it's a form of experimental research, although we're going to get to that in the next slide. It's going to talk about lab research in the next part. This is not going to happen that much in computer science and software development research because we don't work a lot with people and how they feel about things. But that's not to say that it won't ever come up in anything that we try to do. So, for example, you know, I have thought a lot recently about how what is it called, the online video meetings, like what we're on right now, the classrooms, there's other stuff that has been involved, such as, you know, court cases now are being done online. I don't know if you saw the video that came out a few weeks ago where some lawyer accidentally had a cat filter on his Skype call or Zoom call or whatever it was, and he shows up to basically he shows up to his court case, and the judge is like, I think you have a filter on, because on one of the quadrants was this talking cat head. That was the lawyer. And so anyway, so video chat has become huge in the past year because of all this pandemic stuff, right? And there's a part of me that's become interested, and I would love to know, how that's impacted people in our everyday life and in our interactions with other people. That's probably that would fall under like a sociology field, right? That's not necessarily directly related to software, but it does involve a software product, right? It does involve the video chat services like Zoom and Skype and all those others, and Microsoft Teams. Sorry, I mean, we're on Microsoft Teams. I should probably do a shout out to Microsoft Teams. So anyway, so I guess what I'm trying to say is, just because a lot of the research that you guys might be mostly considering right now wouldn't necessarily deal with people and getting data from people's interactions. That's not to say that you won't ever be involved in such research, because I could imagine that how people are interacting with the video chat services could directly affect a lot of software developers, right? Because it could end up resulting in some changes to how these video chat services are how the code is implemented, especially. All that to say is how we understand some of the nature of how people are changing and how the society is being impacted by video chat services and the need for video chat services during these days would be, we would find that information out using these methods, using the field research methods. We would do questionnaires to people to say, hey, how, how are you, do you feel more depressed because you're at home a lot? Just whatever, just there's all kinds of ways that we would get that information from them. We can't run an experiment, right? We can't take, I'm just going to pick one of your names at random. We can't take Barak there, right? We can't say, okay, let's put Barak on a video every week, and let's take another Barak, let's clone him and take another Barak and put him in a classroom environment for all of his classes, and let's see how the 2 different burdocks do at the end of a semester, right? We can't do that. That would be an experiment with a control and a variable, but we can't really do that with something like this, right? All we can do is say, we can ask Barak at the end of this semester, how do you think this semester went compared to if you had been in a classroom? And we can't just ask him like that directly. We have to tailor the questions to be better at drawing that information out. Okay. So again, not something that you will probably use a lot in your time here at university, but I'd imagine this will become important, especially as technology becomes as prevalent as it is these days, and well, as it has been for a long time and is becoming more so, that computing technology is going to be something that impacts lots of different fields. And yeah. And so okay. So that would be the field research information. And then of course there's also experimental research, the lab research. You might, and again, these slides are based on a field that's not computer science based, but in a laboratory research, this would be a type of thing where maybe, I know Seth, I don't know all the rest of you, your fields or your topics, but I know for Seth, what his research is related to, he does run these experiments. He takes a model and he runs, he runs a type of simulation, and it gets output and data, and he analyzes that data to determine if the current algorithm that's being used is a good one, right? Is something that's going to get us the what he's looking for, right? And I don't want to give too much about his research, because I expect that many of you will probably be giving presentations related to this, like a presentation or term paper that would be related to your research. Okay. And actually, in the second hour, we'll talk a little bit something about an idea I had for that presentation stuff. Okay. All right. So basically, bird's eye view, our research process. We want to understand what the problem is. We do a literature survey. Sometimes we find out that the problem's already been solved. If that's the case, or at least has been solved, well. If that's the case, we can either abandon the original research problem and try to find another one, or we could try to see if maybe there are aspects of the solution that are problematic in and of themselves. Oftentimes there are, with our solutions to our world problems, there are what are called unintended consequences, where we have a solution to a problem that exists, but the solution causes problems, right? I can give you lots of examples, but I can't think of any that I specifically already have ready in my head right now. And that would probably be more of an ethics discussion anyway, so we'll save that for the second hour. Okay. You develop your hypothesis of, okay, if I propose this solution, or if I propose that we do this experiment, this is what my expected results will be. Then you design your research, whether it requires an experiment or some type of field research where you got an input from what exists, from what's out there, whether it be if it's involving people, something for questionnaire or something like that, or if it's involving not people, but you need to get more information from what's out there. Okay, this is where you're preparing that, you're designing that, you're figuring out what information do I need to get, what data do I need to go out there and get. Then you collect it, you execute the project. Once that's done, you analyze the data, test your hypothesis. Does the data prove or disprove the hypothesis, or neither. There is oftentimes where the data doesn't do either, right? And what do we do in a situation where the data doesn't disprove the hypothesis, but it also doesn't confirm it? Right? So we've got to determine, okay, what do we do in a situation like that? And then we can make some generalizations and interpret the data based on that, based on what the data does for our hypothesis. And then we write up the report and hopefully get, in most cases, what we're trying to do is write up a paper, a journal or conference paper, or in many of your cases, a thesis, right? So that you can graduate, and that's what that's how it kind of ends. Now, it was written that it's done and everything. There's no more need for any further research regarding the topic. Obviously, there's lots of situations where we write our paper, and the paper itself is really just kind of a introduction to the topic, and then we execute more, right? We use the paper as a way to get more interest in the project, perhaps. It could be useful for all kinds of reasons. It could be useful for getting funding for a project. Could be useful for getting interest in the project, for other people to join and help us get more data and get more results. Okay, so graphically would look something like this. This comes straight from the textbook. Each kind of step leads to another. Some of them feed back into previous steps. Some of them we use information from here, from how we design, to understand how we're going to analyze. Right. So, if any of you have any background in software process, I love software process. Love software engineering. Basically, when we design something, so if we design something, whether it be a research experiment, or how we're going to do our research, or if we're designing a piece of software, even here, we should be already thinking about how we're going to analyze this. So what I tell my first year students, especially later students, is when we're designing our software, we should already be thinking, even in the design, before we write a single line of code, we should already be thinking, how are we going to test the code to make sure that it is correct, to make sure it is what we want. Okay, so that's kind of how that feed forward is. So we even in the design, we're thinking about how to test. Okay? Feedback. We analyze the data. If we realize that we don't have enough data, or there's some stuff we missed, we can go back and collect data as well, right? Okay, so there's some different types of feedbacks and feed forwards. A few criteria of good research. All right, we want to have a clearly defined. We want to make sure that the procedure is described sufficiently in detail for reproducibility. This is probably when I spoke earlier about reproducibility being lacking. Some of the reasons for the lack of reproducibility has to do with that researchers don't really detail their procedure. Some of that is because they didn't do a good job of designing it to start with. So I'm sure that some of you, if you think back to your first year that you wrote code, whether it be you were a computer engineering bachelor student and your first programming class, many of you probably, like me, when you wrote your first program, you didn't really think about designing the program. What did you do? You sat down at the computer and you started typing code away. You started typing Java, or in my case C, whatever. You started typing code, right? And then what happened when you had errors? So what happened? What do you do when you have code? It was for all of us, Mehmet, I think. Yeah, you basically you run it, you get an error, you say you look for the line that the problem was on, you change the line, right, and you join. And sometimes in experimental research, we if in the middle of performing the experiment, or even in non-experimental research, in kind of the field research version, if as we change the procedure, it's hard for us to detail, the procedure, especially if we don't document this, all right, this change is made to the procedure. And so that can make reproducibility hard because other researchers follow us and we don't have a detailed procedure to give them. All right. So now, if we don't design our procedure carefully, well, it'll be harder to get objective results. Let's see. Okay. So as far as the rest of some of the other criteria, I'm trying to think of anything I want to go into because it's already 2:20 and we're about out of time for the first part of this. The last bullet point does kind of lead into the next discussion that we'll talk about in the next hour. The idea of reputation and integrity can produce higher confidence if you have two different sources, if you have two different universities or two different researchers, and one of them has a reputation of being very careful and being very honest in how they report their data, and the other has kind of reputation of just saying things that look good, or not necessarily saying things that look good, but maybe they don't do enough experiments. They don't do enough runs of the experiment, or they don't, if it's a sample size based research, they don't really get a large enough sample size in general. So which one of those are we going to trust, right? We're going to trust the one that has a better reputation and one who's generally been more honest in how they report their findings. Okay, and so this is more kind of this kind of leads into an ethical question, of should we, so the question I'll leave you with, this isn't the one that we're going to talk about next hour, but the question I will leave you with as kind of an ethical question here is, should we results and do a better job of designing our procedures, our experiments and procedures? Should we, in order to have people trust us so that we can get more papers published, or should we do it because it's just good research? It's just the better way to do research. So there's no right answer, by the way. Well, I mean, there's no right answer, but it is a question that we need to ask because, a lot of times there's a saying in academic circles that you have to publish or perish, and the idea is that if you don't publish enough papers in a certain amount of time, that you're seen as not a good researcher. You're seen as not as good at performing research and doing stuff like that. So there's this idea that you have to publish a certain amount of papers in a certain amount of time. So should you do stuff in order to increase your publications, or should you do stuff because it's a good research, even if it doesn't mean more publications? So I won't make you answer that online, but it is a question that I would like you to think about. So, okay, we will end let's see, we'll end the first hour there. That's the end of those slides. And what we'll do is we'll take a break now. And when we come back in 10 minutes at 2:35, I have a question for you to consider, and I'd like us to talk about it. I'd like for there to be a discussion about that. Okay, so I'll see you guys in 10 minutes.